You are Locked On Coogs, your daily podcast on the Houston Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Park Ranger, the Locked On Coogs here. We're going to talk a little bit of space race rivalry kind of things. And listen, I understand this keeps coming up. This is the second segment of the first segment because this keeps coming. We talked about this some before, but I want to shout out Joe Duarte, who asked you, Central Florida, UCF brass at Big 12 Media Days about a Houston UCF rivalry, a space race theme rivalry. And I believe it was the athletic director. I could be getting my names confused here, but they said they were open to it. And so it opened the can of worms here for another discussion about a space-themed rivalry between these two institutions. Houston is Space City, the University of Houston, therefore the University of Space City. It's going to be on the football stadium, right? UCF was a Central Florida's created literally for NASA by NASA, right? Like those two schools have that it's actually a thing, right? Unlike a lot of schools in the conference, both of these schools are not in your traditional college towns. UCF is in Orlando. Houston is obviously in Houston. Those are big cities that, frankly, if the college football teams aren't good, there are other things to go do in town. If I were trying to sell someone to visit Houston, I could sell them on things to do in Houston that are not going to see the university, although I would say going to see a game is a fun part of that, right? I can do the same thing in Central Florida land. Hey, go to Disney World, right? Like there's a whole other set of things to do. It's a big college. It's a big town. It's not necessarily a big college, but it's a well-funded university in a big city, right? This is the third conference shared between these two programs, right? I think that makes this interesting that it hasn't happened yet, right? When looking at like, well, why hasn't this? Is the third time they're in the same conference. I do think there's a cool trophy to be had with this one. A space helmet that you put on after the winner, the MVP puts it on their head, and you can like flip the visor up and like I think that's a fun thing to do. I don't mean to like dismiss that as not a cool aspect of this. But I do think the conversation opens up a separate one. College sports are made up of rivalries. The rivalries are part of the fun. And bluntly, when Houston was left out of the initial Big 12, when the Southwest Conference dissolved and Houston was not left into the Big 12 with Texas and A&M and all of them, right? A lot of their rivalries just dissolved with it. And in pro sports, so many guys are friends, right? Like the Packers and Vikings, the fans don't like each other. The occasional corner and receiver, they play each other twice a year. They might not like each other. The occasional coach that coach against but it's not consensus. There's usually people on both sides that get along. Even like the Eagles and the Giants, right? Philly and New York and what like ultimately there'll be guys on both teams that want to insert college and are buddies. They share the locker room or whatever, right? In college, that doesn't happen. Even in NIL transfer portal world, you have like Army spends the whole year saying beat Navy. Texas A&M's fight song still takes shots at Texas at Austin. Ohio State spent an entire week or more crossing out M's all over everything they do. An Alabama fan went to prison for poisoning trees on Auburn's campus. Now, that last one might be a little too far, but ultimately, that energy, that enthusiasm, that craziness is what makes college sports great and what makes them better than pro sports, right? When you make the argument for college sports, it's not that the product on the field or court is always better, although sometimes it is comparable, it's aesthetically because of whatever rule or what have you. It is more about the passion. Rivalries drive that passion. And whether it's UCF or whatever, now that you're in a new conference, the Big 12, you spend a couple years in this, you kind of understand the lay of the land. It is probably time to start building that out. And Central Florida feels like an easy one, the space race, etc. I do think there's some in-state animosity with Texas Tech, another public institution, big basketball program with McCaslin there right now as well. I could see that being a comparable thing. Obviously, there's a large tech presence along with several other alumni groups in Houston, right? So that'll make for some fun there. It's kind of the two ends of the stage, you get the city folks and the rural folks and all that too, right? Baylor's, I think, the closest in terms of proximity in the conference. I could see that being different. It also is two old Southwest Conference folks, much like Tech, private versus public, again, city versus Waco, and all that kind of stuff. TCU, you can add in some DFW versus Houston, although TCU is kind of in Fort Worth, isn't Dallas, but you kind of get the DFW Metroplex versus Houston. There's something there, but regardless, you need something. I even joked on social media, going back and forth, and led into a texting conversation with our host of Locked On Sun Devils, Arizona State Sun Devils, Richie, right? The I-10 rivalry, which involved UTEP, dissolved with all this conference realignment this time around. And I was saying, Phoenix and Houston are both on I-10. we could just take the trophy or some version of it. They also have the same hand sign, which I have on my shirt today. Not that was actually a coincidence, but you can have some fun with that. Make a longer I-10 rivalry between Phoenix is, I guess, right next to Arizona State, and then Houston or whatever, right? Something there. You're both new to the conference, again, the same hand sign or whatever. There's something to be had there as well. But whatever the case is, you kind of need to start forcing that, even if it's Tech, even if it's Baylor, even if it's whoever. Central Florida, Iowa State in basketball has been a fun one, obviously. Kansas in basketball has been a fun one too. I think, though, that what people are too afraid to admit is it's going to feel a little artificial at the start. You're reinvigorating, restarting, resparking some of these emotions that have just not been in the athletic program for the better part of 30 years, right? I mean, yes, in 1985, the goal was to beat those guys in Austin. Yes, in 1987, the goal was to beat those guys in College Station. Yeah, that was real. I don't mean to say it wasn't real, but you hadn't played them enough times, and you don't really play them anymore outside of if you want to schedule some non-conference stuff. That'd be kind of crazy. Would be fun though. You don't really play them all that often, so you can't call someone your rivalry that you just flat don't play. The Big 12 is probably going to have to play some sort of a hand in this too. Scheduling has been interesting. They haven't protected every rivalry across the conference. Yes, Utah and BYU play each other. Arizona State play each other. Those kinds of things, but it's not as concrete across the whole conference always. So the conference will have to play some sort of a role. But I do think part of the reason the space race conversation comes up with Central Florida, Houston, the Tech conversation, whatever it is, I do think Houston needs this. I do think college sports in general needs this. We kind of created it in the American with Memphis. Full disclosure, part of that was because they beat us a couple times in the early stages of it. Right now, I can talk about 2023. I guess they beat us once with Sasser hurt, but outside of that, the early stages of that hatred and rivalry were because Houston beat them, and then because Memphis beat Houston, then Houston beat them back, and then you had the football game with the crazy comeback and all those kinds of things, right? The half court shot from Tremont Mark and all of that. And Jamal Shedd hit a buzzer beater against them too. All of those things add up, right, to make a rivalry. That felt like it was naturally building, but now you're not seeing them anymore, right? There was something with SMU too. I felt like we had the kickoff return and all that. There was some fun stuff there. The crazy high scoring game. Houston was on the wrong side of it. Football. DFW, Dallas, Houston, I think created a natural rivalry there too. But as you're building this out, I think people are scared of doing it because the start will feel artificial. And I think that's just part of the bullet you got to bite with it. Honestly, I think it's good for the university. I think it's necessary in college sports. And if it's Central Florida or whomever, I think it's worth investigating and going a little bit further. Speaking of investigating going a little bit further, Houston is highly recruiting trail in basketball. Big offer this week went out to a legacy basketball player that may be somewhat subtly mentioned behind my head for the video audience. We'll talk about that in just 1 second.